How many have taken a class called The True Story of Hanukkah? Oh, good. Okay. Ultimately, just so you know, and if you have the packet you see, we are going to be looking quite a bit at the book of Maccabees, which I'm guessing most of you have not heard of before, because it is not in our Bible. It's called the Book of the Apocrypha, and I will be talking more about it later. But it really is accepted as not perfect, but as good of a 2,100-year-old history book as we can find. So that's going to be our main guide. I'm going to try to give you a little bit of background before. We have a mix. Our regular introduction to Judaism class is here tonight, which are folks who have been with us since just before the High Holy Days, learning about all of the holidays and life cycle and Jewish theology and history. And when I say all that we can do in 10 weeks. And what we try to do in that class is really give an adult understanding of Judaism. It really is Sunday school for adults. And with Hanukkah especially, I think it has become such an important part of American Judaism, especially really in the last 30 years. I think a lot of us, anyone my age or older, grew up where Hanukkah really was something we did in our house. We never saw big Hanukkah celebrations out in public. You would never see a menorah next to the Christmas tree at the mall. Hanukkah Herod was on Saturday Night Live in 1989. And I think that really was the first major pop culture reference to Hanukkah. If you want to know the Hanukkah story as we tell it to most people, the best place to go is the Rugrats Hanukkah special. I think that came out in like 1996. And even as a 15-year-old, that was huge. That was huge. To have that in such a public space and where so many people were seeing it, and really outside of one small plot point, it wasn't about how Hanukkah compares to Christmas. It really was about Hanukkah. For those who were really excited about the Hallmark Hanukkah movies coming out, those did not do as well. I haven't seen them, but from what I've read, they really are Christmas movies with a Jewish character. But as I've seen Hanukkah become more and more public and more assimilated into American culture, really the holiday that everyone celebrates, no matter what your connection is to Judaism during the rest of the year, you're going to find, as we learn this true story of Hanukkah, that really might be one of the great ironies in modern Jewish life. So what I'm hoping is we bring together our Introduction to Judaism class, which includes some of those who are converting to Judaism, some of you who have grown up Jewish, some who have been learning all your lives, have different exposure levels. We're really going to think about, as we learn this story, what does it mean for the way in which we think about Hanukkah today, whatever our background is, as Reform Jews in 2019, which I still can say. And I will be saying for another couple months after New Year's, because that's what I do. It is a lot of text tonight, because I think the book of Maccabees is fascinating, and I wanted to give you as much as I could, but warning, I'm going to be reading a lot. And if anyone falls asleep, I will not be offended. but we do have regular coffee out as well as the evening. And like I said, you all have a packet in front of you. If it's easier to read, you're going to see exactly how much we're going to be reading. But if it's easier for you to read paper on the screen, it's there. And my apologies, because I should have made the font larger, both on the screen and in the packet. It's great. But I'm going to read it all out loud. So, 586 BCE is when the Babylonians came into Jerusalem and destroyed the first temple. The Jews are sent into exile into Babylonia and remain there until the Persians defeat the Babylonians in 539 BCE. And under King Cyrus, we are allowed to return beginning the next year. And life for Jews under Persian rule is really good. So I wrote here the true story of Purim. And for my introduction to Judaism, folks, usually we would do a little more about Purim and the book of Esther in this class. We may get to a little bit at the end, and we're going to do a little bit now. So the book of Esther, for those who don't know, takes place in Persia, where the king Ahasuerus is displayed as this kind of drunk buffoon, whose advisor Haman convinces him that the Jews have spread out throughout the land and really need to be contained, and the answer is to kill them all. And Esther, the beautiful Jewish woman, hides her Jewishness, becomes the queen, and is able to foil the king's plot, saving the Jewish people. The true story of Purim is that that never happened. That one we are fairly sure never happened. Sorry. Yes, you can still eat hamantashen, and you can still eat Haman, because even though that story may have never happened, the story happened. And the story has happened throughout Jewish history. But the book of Esther most likely was written during the time period that we're going to talk about today. And while the book of Maccabees did not make it into the canon, the book of Esther did. Why? The book of Maccabees is written at a time right when the canon of what's included in the Bible or not is being closed. And it's such a late book. It's written in a Greek style. You're going to see there's some problematic content. So the rabbis wanted us to stay as far away from that book as possible. But the book of Esther was a, what's the word? Not a parody. It was a parody. But it was taking the environment of the Jews at that time and placing it into the Persian period 300 years prior, which made it a much safer book, and it allowed the author to talk about all of the different things the Jews were going through without being at risk of, because right after the Greeks will come the Romans, so there's always an oppressor. The Purim story, the very first thing that Hitler did, not the very first, one of the first things Hitler did when he came into power was ban the celebration of Purim. Because Purim was a safe way for the Jews to talk about Hitler, because they would make Hitler into Haman. So what the author of the book of Esther had done is create kind of this character who could represent everyone who wanted to do harm to the Jews so that they could tell that story in a non-threatening way. If you're upset by this, wait until I get to where we're going. You're in trouble. You're in trouble. No, the Purim story was written most likely during the time of the Chanukah story.
Okay.
Yes. So life was good under the Persians. The second temple was built under the Persian king Darius. I think he was 2 kings after Cyrus. And the Persians remained in control of the land that is now Israel until they were defeated by the Greeks. And the leader of the Greek Empire was Alexander the Great. Now, I always give the disclaimer that in high school, I was a math and science guy. So I never took any AP history classes and didn't really pay attention. And then by the time I got to college, I was all Judaic studies. So my historical understanding of the world is very much through a Jewish lens. So to me, this is really the most important thing about Alexander the Great. And all I know about Alexander the Great, Napoleon, what did Napoleon do? He reestablished the Beit Din, the rabbinic court. That's the most important thing about Napoleon. So my understanding of the Greek Empire is very limited. So some of you, I'm sure, know more than I do, but I'm going to do my best to give you a little bit of background. We're going to start with the memory of Alexander the Great within the Jewish world. And I'm not actually going to read this whole story, but you have it in your packet, or you can read it on the screen. The idea is the Samaritans were coming, and the Jewish community at the time was worried about what they were going to do, what they were going to request. And Alexander the Great meets Shimon HaTzadik, Shimon the righteous one. And Alexander gets off of his chariot and bows before this Jewish leader. And his escorts say to him, "Why would an important king such as you bow to this Jew?" And he said to them, "I do so because the image of this man's face is victorious before me on my battlefield." So he's saying that he's had these visions of Shimon HaTzadik, that he's seen his face almost in a dream. And he said to the representatives of the Jewish people, "Why have you come?" And they said, "Is it possible that the temple, the house in which we pray for you and for your kingdom, not to be destroyed, that these Samaritans will try to mislead you into destroying it? And we would remain silent and not tell you." And he said to them, "Who are these people?" And they say, "This is the Samaritans." And he says, "If they're delivered into your hands, deal with them as you please." So pretty much what Alexander says in what's a pretty good, when I say good for the Jews or good to the Jews, it's all relative. But pretty much what he says, as long as no one else destroys your temple, I'm not going to do it. And legend has it that in the following year, every baby boy that was born in the Jewish community was named Alexander. So Alexander is still an acceptable Hebrew name today after Alexander the Great. Now, here's your warning. I already told you the book of Maccabees is not included in the Hebrew Bible. It's part of the Apocrypha, which means it's part of the Catholic Bible. It's part of some Protestant Bibles. The rabbis were very concerned about us reading these books that were written in biblical styles, that were written as if they were biblical books, but were not included in the Hebrew Bible. So Rabbi Akiva taught anyone who reads the external literature, the chutzot, these apocryphal works, has lost his or her place in the world to come. So this is your warning. If you follow that teaching of Rabbi Akiva and you want to leave now, I understand. I don't think so. But 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So the first book of Maccabees, most likely written about 100-ish CE. So after the Maccabean revolt, after the story that we're about to read is over, but within, 80, 90 years. So the memory is still recent. If there weren't people who lived through it, the next generation was there. So again, this is considered to be historical-ish because it's written by the victors, first of all, and it's also written with a religious agenda. So it is history with an asterisk. It starts with Alexander the Great. It came to pass after the triumph of Alexander the Macedonian, son of Philip, who first reigned in Hellas, who came out of the land of Kittim and defeated Darius, the king of the Persians. And he fought a lot of battles and took almost all of the strongholds and slew almost all of the kings of the earth and went through to the ends of the earth and took spoils of many nations, insomuch that the earth was quiet before him. Whereupon he was exalted and his heart was lifted up, and he gathered a mighty strong host and ruled over countries and nations and kings who became tributaries unto him. For my history scholars, how's that as a synopsis of the reign of Alexander the Great? After these things he fell sick and perceived that he should die. Wherefore he called his servants, such as were honorable and had been brought up with him from his youth, and parted his kingdom among them while he was yet alive. So Alexander did not have an heir. So the Greek kingdom upon his death was split among his friends, his governors, his military generals, and everyone got a territory. Spoiler alert, it doesn't go so well. Alexander reigned 12 years and then died, and his servants bare rule everyone in his place. And after his death, they all put crowns upon themselves, so did their sons after them many years, and evils were multiplied in the earth. So that's the introduction to the book of Maccabees. Now I'm going to go back to giving you a little bit of the history the best I can explain it. How is it that we're talking about Greece and Israel? Well, we know that's because Alexander the Great had everything. When you're telling the Hanukkah story, if any of you become rabbis, or are telling the story in any context, you have to be very careful. It was the family service before Hanukkah, and we were doing a Hanukkah play, and I'm telling the story, I'm narrating, and it's the Greeks this, the Greeks that, the Greeks this, the Greeks that, and not thinking that the bar mitzvah family for the next day is one of the more prominent Greek families in Tampa. It's an interfaith family, and there were like 30 of them in the front two rows, and they made sure after the service that I knew that it was the Syrian Greeks in the story of Hanukkah, not the Greeks of today. And even that, when we're telling biblical stories, when we talk about the Egyptians, when we talk about the Greeks, or even the Syrian Greeks, we want to remember that this was a long time ago, and we're not saying anything about the people who live in those countries. So we're going to zoom in now, and here is what is today Israel, and here is what was the Seleucid kingdom of the Greek Empire and the Ptolemaic kingdom of the Greek Empire. And the best way to think about it is Egypt and Syria. So to make things easy, I'll say Ptolemies and Seleucids, but you really have the Egyptian Greeks and the Syrian Greeks. And you have what I call Seleucid Ptolemaic ping pong. Because, like I said, this division of the Greek Empire didn't go so well, and there was a lot of fighting over territory. So this little land of Israel, sitting right in the middle of two kingdoms, was prime fighting territory. And it goes between the Seleucids and the Ptolemies until 301 BCE, when the Ptolemies really take control for about 100 years. And again, life is pretty good for the Jews. If you've ever heard of the Septuagint is a translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek, and it's written during this time. Jewish life is thriving under Greek rule. So what starts to happen slowly, and think again about the Purim story, even though I told you it's not true. But what was happening? You had this Jewish woman, Esther, who was able to pretend to be part of the Persian Empire. So the Purim story is a story of an assimilated Jewish princess who saves the Jewish people. So assimilation is, everyone knows the word assimilation, right? The acceptance of the modern society in which we live by a Jewish community. So under the Greek Empire, we see Jews gradually accepting pieces of Greek culture. It's not called assimilation. There's a very specific term, Hellenization. Right? Hellen was the word used for Greece. So the Hellenization of the Jewish world is elements of Jewish society accepting pieces of Greek culture into their lives. And as far as we know, while there may have been those who said this is horrible, this is watering down Jewish life, this is a problem, for the most part, it would have been accepted as a valid way of being Jewish. That you could be Jewish and you could accept Greek life. Then the Seleucids take over, initially invading in 221 BCE, taking control in 200. They reduce taxes on the Jewish community, and that's really why everyone wanted that little piece of land. Because that little piece of land paid taxes to whoever had control over it. And the temple would be responsible for collecting not only the tax to support the temple, but also the tax that would be going to the ruling empire. So the Seleucids reduce that tax and commit themselves to helping in the repair of Jerusalem, which only intensifies or improves the feelings that the Jewish community had for their now Syrian Greek rulers. I know I had to think through that. There you go. I should have had that the whole time. Then we have this guy Antiochus IV, or Antiochus Epiphanes. And Antiochus IV is requested by the high priest. And what happens is you end up with high priests. The high priest was responsible for running the temple. They were in charge of all the sacrifices. And during this ping pong and during this time, some priests were very accepting of Greek culture and others were not. Jason was a high priest who was all for bringing Greek culture into Jewish life. We would call him a Hellenized high priest. He asks Antiochus Epiphanes if they can build a gymnasium in Jerusalem, And Antiochus says, okay, right? He thinks that it would be good for the Jewish people to bring this modern world into their life. So they, now, when I say sound familiar, I am not talking about hiding the circumcision, but I am talking about doing anything we can to try to fit in. So how, do you want me to be, it's not graphic, it is graphic. Do you want me to be graphic? There were Jewish men who would put weights on the skin where the foreskin used to be in order to uncircumcise themselves. Because they weren't the only ones in the gymnasium. The assumption is that there were Greeks who were living among them, and they didn't want to be thought less of because they were circumcised. So you have a Jewish world that is observing their Judaism, but hiding their Judaism, or not broadcasting their Judaism in order to fit in with the modern world. Does that sound familiar? Yeah. Now, what I didn't write about, there was a, okay. So back to Maccabees, we're back to chapter 1. There came out of them a wicked root, Antiochus, surnamed Epiphanes, son of Antiochus the king, who had been a hostage at Rome, and he reigned in the 137th year of the kingdom of the Greeks. In those days went there out of Israel wicked men, who persuaded many, saying, let us go and make a covenant with the heathen that are round about us, for since we departed from them, we have had much sorrow. Now, let me give a little background. When I teach repentance with regard to Yom Kippur, Maimonides has all of these laws for repentance, how we say we're sorry for the sins that we've committed on Yom Kippur. And there are 4 sins that are unforgivable, that you cannot repent for. I don't remember all 4. One is selling stolen merchandise. Right? Why can't you repent for selling stolen merchandise? Well, one, once you sell what you stole, you can't give it back. But you could pay the person what it was worth. But what you've done is turn the person who bought the stolen merchandise into a sinner. Right? Unknowingly. So by leading someone else to sin, you cannot be forgiven for that sin. So in the eyes of some branches of Orthodox Judaism today, Reform rabbis are the worst of the worst when it comes to transgressors. Because we are not performing all of the commandments, but we are telling all of you that it's okay not to perform all of the commandments, and that is authentic Judaism. So my sinning is one thing, but when I tell you all that sinning is okay, then I'm leading you to transgress, and that is the worst of what one can do. Right? So in this retelling of the story 100 years later, from the point of view of the victors, they're going to look at these Hellenized Jews as sinners, right, who gave up their Judaism for this Greek culture. But the worst of those sinners was any leadership in the community, the priests, the leaders, who said this is a good thing. Right? Jason, the priest who asked for the gymnasium to be built, is the worst of the worst. Does that make sense? And that's whose point of view we're hearing in the book of Maccabees. I don't know where I was, but I'm going to start here. Then certain of the people were so forward herein that they went to the king, who gave them a license to do after the ordinances of the heathen, whereupon they built a place of exercise at Jerusalem according to the customs of the heathen, and made themselves uncircumcised, and forsook the holy covenant, and joined themselves to the heathen, and were sold to do mischief. You see how they're telling the story a little differently than I told it. And after that, Antiochus had smitten Egypt, right? They missed that Ptolemaic empire. He returned again in the 143rd year and went up against Israel and Jerusalem with a great multitude, and entered proudly into the sanctuary, and took away the golden altar and the candlestick of light and all the vessels thereof, and the table of the showbread and the pouring vessels and the vials and the censers of gold, and the veil, and the crown, and the golden ornaments that were before the temple, all which he pulled off. He took also the silver and the gold and the precious vessels, and he took the hidden treasures which he found. Most likely there was some kind of revolt of the Jews who felt that what was happening was an abomination. They did something against the Greeks, something against the Hellenized Jews. Antiochus said, "Oh, no, you didn't," and lashes out against the Jewish community as a whole. And now it's not celebrating Greek culture, being Jewish and being Greek. Now Antiochus goes to a place that no one wanted him to go and desecrates the temple. Takes all of the instruments, all of the things that beautify the temple as property of the Greeks. And, oh, this is really small. I'm sorry. And we'll also, I'm going to read it. So, and don't worry, you have it in front of you. So he continues, therefore there was great mourning in Israel in every place where they were. The princes and elders mourned, the virgins and young men were made feeble, and the beauty of women was changed. Every bridegroom took up lamentation, and she that sat in marriage. So even those who should have been the happiest were mourning. I'm not going to read everything, but what Antiochus goes on to do is turn the temple into a shrine for Greek gods. So according to the book of Maccabees, even those who had been accepting Greek culture, many of them now realize, right, this went to uncharted territory. And no matter how it happened, this is not okay. I'm going to go to the second paragraph. Moreover, King Antiochus wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people, and everyone should leave his laws. So all the heathen agreed according to the commandment of the king. Yea, many also of the Israelites consented to his religion, and sacrificed unto idols, and profaned the Sabbath. For the king had sent letters by messenger unto Jerusalem and the cities of Judah, that they should follow the strange laws of the land, and forbid burnt offerings and sacrifice and drink offerings in the temple. That was how we worshipped, right? We worship by taking sacrifices to the temple. Those were banned. That they should profane the Sabbaths and festival days. So observing Shabbat was made illegal. And pollute the sanctuary and holy people. Set up altars and groves and chapels of idols. Sacrifice swine's flesh and unclean beasts. So the temple, our holiest place, they were sacrificing pig to the Greek gods, knowing what that would do to the Jews. And again, transcribing to a later time, what did the Nazis do when they went into a town? They went first to the synagogue. They urinated on Torah scrolls. They turned sanctuaries into stables as a way of showing this is what we think of your holy place. You learned it from somewhere. That they should also leave their children uncircumcised and make their souls abominable with all manner of uncleanness and profanation, to the end they might forget the law and change all the ordinances, and whosoever would not do according to the commandment of the king, he said he should die. And whosoever was found with any of the books of the Testament, the Torah, or if any committed to the law, the king's commandment was that they should put him to death. Thus did they, by their authority, unto the Israelites every month, to as many as were found in the cities. Now on the 25th day of the month, they did sacrifice upon the idol altar, which was upon the altar of God. At which time, according to the commandment, they put to death certain women that had caused their children to be circumcised, and they hanged the infants about their necks, rifled their houses, and slew them that had circumcised them. Howbeit, many in Israel were fully resolved and confirmed in themselves not to eat any unclean thing. Wherefore they rather to die, that they might not be defiled with meats, that they might not profane the Holy Covenant. And so then they died, and there was very great wrath upon Israel. So you go from Jews who were willingly assimilating into Greek culture, practicing Judaism. We don't know, were they eating pork with their Greek friends? Right? Did they have shrimp tacos at the gymnasium? We don't know. But they identified as Jewish and Greek until the Jewish part became illegal. And I asked my confirmation students to think about it, that this is not Hitler, right? There's a difference. This is not, we're going to murder you for having Jewish grandparents. This is, we're going to murder you for practicing your Judaism. And in a world today where we are so ingrained into modern society that, forget the murder part, we don't have to be so extreme. But when people are given a choice between their Judaism and their modernity, if we were given a choice of either being ultra-Orthodox or giving up Jewish practice and being fully American, I think it would be a hard choice for a lot of people, right? If there was no Reform Judaism and it was either nothing or ultra-Orthodox, I don't know what people would do, right? The difference here was the way in which it was put upon the people, the murder, the violence, right? And as we're thinking about what Chanukah means in our world today as Reform Jews, are you starting to see why it gets a little tricky? But you still have this forceful prohibition of Jewish practice. And giving away a little bit of where we're headed, the Greeks of the time, Antiochus, would not have been a big fan of this place, right? We would have all been killed for doing what we're doing tonight. But the Maccabees would not have been big fans of ours either, right? We were the enemy as much as the Syrian Greeks were, as we're about to see. In those days arose Mattathias, the son of John, the son of Simeon, a priest of the sons of Yari from Jerusalem, and he dwelt in Modin, and he had 5 sons. And when he saw the blasphemies that were committed in Judah and Jerusalem, he said, "Woe is me! Wherefore was I born to see this misery of my people and of the holy city and to dwell there? When it was delivered into the hand of the enemy and the sanctuary into the hand of strangers, her temple is become as a man without glory." All right. In the meanwhile, the king's officers, such as compelled the people to revolt, came into the city of Modin to make them sacrifice. Now, I think, So at some point, and it might be in a little bit, I think it was one of my dots, there's a story in the book of Maccabees where the Syrian Greek army goes to a Jewish community intentionally on Shabbat. And as a way of making their point and proving their power, they go into this Jewish community on Shabbat and destroy everyone. And the Jewish community says, we would rather be killed by you than defile the Sabbath. And Mattathias and the Maccabees is the word we'll hear, Hasmoneans is the more academic word. The Hasmoneans said, we are not going to let that happen to us. And if they come to us on Shabbat, we will fight them on Shabbat. And that is Jewish law. Right? Jewish law is that you are allowed to break Shabbat in order to defend yourself. Again, going back to modern times, the Yom Kippur War was a similar principle. That there was the thought that if we attack Israel on Yom Kippur, they're not going to be ready for us. They were ready. So the king's officers come to Modin and ask them to make a sacrifice. And when many of Israel came unto them, Mattathias also and his sons came together. Then answered the king's officers and said to Mattathias on this wise, thou art a ruler and an honorable and great man in this city, and strengthened with sons and brethren. Now therefore come thou first, and fulfill the king's commandment. Like as all the heathen have done, yea, and the men of Judah also, and such as remain at Jerusalem, so shall you and your house be in the number of the king's friends. And you and your children shall be honored with silver and gold and many rewards. Then Mattathias answered and spoke with a loud voice, though all the nations that are under the king's dominion obey him, and fall away every one from the religion of their fathers and give consent to his commandments, and will I and my sons and my brethren walk in the covenant of our fathers. God forbid that we should forsake the law and the ordinances. We will not hearken to the king's words to go from our religion, either on the right hand or the left. Now when he had left speaking these words, there came one of the Jews in the sight of all to sacrifice on the altar which was at Modin, according to the king's commandment. When Mattathias saw this, he was inflamed with zeal. His range trembled. Neither could he forbear to show his anger according to judgment. Wherefore he ran and slew him upon the altar. Also the king's commissioner who compelled men to sacrifice, he killed at that time, and the altar he pulled down. Thus dealt he zealously for the law of God, like Pinchas did unto Zomri his son. So Mattathias says, no, I won't do this. Another Jewish man goes up and says, I'll do it. And Mattathias goes up to the altar and slaughters him and the king's officer who was there. And there's a story in the book of Numbers where Pinchas, they say anyone who is sleeping with Moabite women, any Jewish men sleeping with Moabite women will be put to death. And it just so happens, I guess conveniently, that right then someone goes and cohabits with a Moabite woman, and Pinchas impales them both. And the Torah views that as a righteous act, because they had just been told not to do it. So, another story that we struggle with as we're reading Torah in a modern light. Mattathias cried throughout the city with a loud voice, saying, whosoever is zealous of the law and maintaining the covenant, let him follow me. So he and his sons fled into the mountains and left all that ever they had in the city. Then many that sought after justice and judgment went down into the wilderness to dwell there, both they and their children and their wives and their cattle, because afflictions increased sore upon them. Oh, and then this is where we have the battle against the Jewish community on Shabbat. And here you have Maccabees, Hasmonean, and Matthias saying that we'll fight anyone who comes to us on Shabbat. And Matthias and his friends went round about and pulled down the altars, and any children they found within the coast of Israel uncircumcised, they circumcised valiantly. Right? So they're not only going after the Syrian Greek army, any of the Jews who had gone along with Antiochus's decree are fought along the way. And it doesn't necessarily say it explicitly, but you can imagine what happened if they fought against this. Now, when the time drew near that Matthias should die, he said unto his sons, you have pride and have gotten strength, and the time of destruction and the wrath and indignation. Now, therefore, my sons, be zealous for the law and give your lives for the covenant of your fathers. And in the chapter that follows, you have the battle. Judah Maccabee and his followers fought this guerrilla warfare and were able to defeat the Syrian Greek army just enough to get to the temple. It was not a full defeat, but they make it to the temple. They're able to surround the temple and protect the temple. And again, along their way, we can assume that they weren't only killing the Syrian Greek army, but those Jews who they viewed as being among the enemy. Now, we get to the temple and you're like, wow, this is not the story I learned in Rugrats. But now we're going to get to one day of oil lasting 8 days. Now we're at the temple. Now I'm going to be able to latch on. Then said Judas and his brethren, behold, our enemies are discomfited. Let us go up to cleanse and dedicate the sanctuary. Upon this, all the hosts assembled themselves together and went out to Mount Zion. And when they saw the sanctuary desolate and the altar profaned, and the gates burned up, and shrubs growing in the courts as in the forest, or in one of the mountains, yea, and the priest chambers pulled down, they rent their clothes, they made lamentation, and cast ashes upon their heads. They fell down flat to the ground upon their faces, and blew an alarm with the trumpets, and cried for help. No matter what we think of what they've done up to now, right, this I think we can relate to, right? Imagine returning to a synagogue that had been desecrated, finding Torah scrolls on the ground. There were, if you saw the pictures of the synagogue in, it was in Beverly Hills. It's terrible. And there was a guy who went in and, again, what's happening in the world today, we'll talk more about. But this happened last week, right? And to see those pictures, no matter who we are, and I know I spoke on Yom Kippur that we don't have to be afraid of the Torah. If you drop a Torah, there are worse things you could do when it's an accident, but to take something so important to us and to desecrate it in that way. And this was the temple and what had been done. So they mourn, right? And that's why Jews today, we mourn the destruction of the temple. It doesn't matter how we feel about sacrifice and priesthood. It shouldn't happen. Then Judah appointed certain men to fight against those that were in the fortress until he had cleansed the sanctuary. So he chose priests of blameless conversation, such as had pleasure in the law. So no more of these modern Hellenized priests. These are priests who came out of his army. They cleansed the sanctuary, bare out the defiled stones into an unclean place. And as they consulted what to do with the altar of their offerings, which was profane, they thought it best to pull it down, lest it should be a reproach to them, because the heathen had defiled it. Therefore they pulled it down and laid up the stones in the mountain of the temple in a convenient place, until there should come a prophet to tell them what to do. So it had been our altar that they had offered these sacrifices to Greek gods. So they tear down the altar and decide they're going to start from scratch. So they took whole stones according to the law, built a new altar according to the former, and made up the sanctuary and the things that were within the temple and hallowed the courts. They made new holy vessels, and into the temple they brought this says candlestick. What is the candlestick? The menorah. I don't have a picture. If we take a break, I'll go get, I have an oil lamp that I want to show you all. The menorah was in the temple. It was a 7-branched lampstand that was the precursor to the Ner Tamid today. So the lamps on the menorah would be lit at all times, and it was part of what had been defiled. So they brought in a new lampstand that would hold the lamps that would be the new menorah in the temple. And the altar of the burnt offerings, and the incense, and the table, and upon the altar they burned incense, and the lamps that were upon the menorah they lit, that they might give light into the temple. They set the loaves upon the table, spread out the veils, and finished all the works which they had begun. So, no oil, no 1 day of oil that lasted for 8 days. They rededicated the temple. That the word for dedication is Chanukah. So they dedicated the temple, which included lighting the lamps on the menorah that had been desecrated. Now, on the 25th day of the 9th month, which is called Kislev, in the 148th year, they rose up in the morning and offered sacrifice according to the law on the new altar, which they had made. At the time and the day that the heathen had profaned it, even it was dedicated with songs and harps and cymbals, and all the people fell upon their faces, worshiping and praising the God of heaven who had given them success. And so they kept the dedication of the altar 8 days and offered burnt offerings of gladness and sacrificed the sacrifice of deliverance and praise. They decked also the forefront of the temple with crowns of gold and shields, and the gates and the chambers they renewed, and new doors upon them. Thus was there very great gladness among the people, for that the reproach of the heathen was put away. Moreover, Judah and his brothers with the whole congregation of Israel ordained that the days of the dedication of the altar should be kept in their season from year to year by the space of 8 days, from the 25th of the month of Kislev, with mirth and gladness. So why 8 days? If there's no 1 day of oil lasting 8 days, why the 8 days? There are 2 possibilities. One, the ordination of a new priest was an 8-day celebration. So they were rededicating the temple and the priest, so it makes sense that it was 8 days. But there's another reason that I really like. And this is another one where I think we can gain meaning in a story that I know I've just taken a lot of meaning away from. We're going to bring some back. Don't worry. Don't be worried. You've made it this far. You can do it. If you're in the introduction class, you have a calendar. If you're not, you've probably celebrated Hanukkah before. What was the last holiday that we observed? We're getting ready for Hanukkah. Sukkot. Right? Now remember, Passover is a 7-day holiday. Sukkot is a 7-day holiday, plus, who remembers? What's that 1 day though? Shmini Atzeret. Right? It's a biblical holiday. It's the 8th day of solemnity. So it is the only biblical holiday that's 8 days. Now remember that whole promise of Mattathias. He saw the community destroyed on Shabbat, and he said, we are not going to let Shabbat and festivals get in the way of our fight. We're playing the long game. So we are going to put our observance aside, not for Greek culture, but to defeat the Greek army. So what would they have been doing during Sukkot? Fighting. And they didn't have the temple anyway. So what do they do once they reclaim the temple? They re-celebrate the festival that they missed. So the 8-day holiday of Hanukkah parallels the 8-day observance of Sukkot and Shmini Atzeret. One more piece. We're about to look at the rabbinic teaching of Chanukah, because if we're not allowed to read everything that we just read, right, that means that a Jewish community who was celebrating Hanukkah had never read everything that we just read. So we are about to find out what story they would have been telling 200 years later. But the rabbis were unhappy with Maccabees for a lot of reasons. The zealotry might not be one, because the rabbis would not have been the biggest fan of Reform Judaism either. But another one was now Maccabees chapter 8, because remember, they had taken over the temple, but the war wasn't over yet. So we rededicate the temple, but the war against the Syrian Greek army continues. Judah had heard of the fame of the Romans, that they were mighty and valiant men, and such as would lovingly accept all that joined themselves unto them, and make a league of amity with all that came up unto them, and that they were men of great valor. And when was this written? If this was written in 100 BCE, they didn't know what the Romans were about to do. It was told him also of their wars and noble acts which they had done among the nations, and how they had conquered them and brought them under tribute. And then my ... is going to be this whole list of all the amazing things the Romans did. But with their friends, and such as relied upon them, they kept in. And that they had conquered kingdoms both far and nigh, so much as all that heard of their name were afraid of them. Also that whom they would help to a kingdom, those reigned, and whom again they displaced, finally that they were greatly exalted. This translation is a little strange, but your understanding of this. So chapter 8 is about how great the Romans were, and even though they destroyed all of these peoples, anyone who was friendly to them, they were friendly to. But the rabbis who 200 years later or 100 years later, are determining what's in our Hebrew Bible, well, they know what the Romans have done, right? The Romans destroyed the Second Temple. So another thing they wouldn't have been so happy about is this praising of the Romans in a biblical book. So here's another reason why the book of Maccabees would not make it into the canon. So the Maccabees do defeat the Syrian Greek army, and we have about 150-ish years, don't quote me on that, but it's somewhere in there, of Jewish independence in the land that is now Israel. Jerusalem is the capital of this independent Hasmonean state. Why do we have gelt on Chanukah? I'm going to give you another reason in a few minutes. But one is coins. Minting your own money is a sign of independence. So we have found coins from the Hasmonean dynasty with Judah Maccabee right there on the front. And gelt represents that sign of independence. Another reason why the rabbis are not big fans of the book of Maccabees or the Hasmonean dynasty is the Hasmoneans put themselves as both king and priest, which was a biblical no-no. When kingship was allowed, which the prophets urged against. The people said, we want a king. The prophets said, no, you don't. The people said, yes, we do. So kings were allowed, but with strict restrictions, one of which was the monarchy and the priesthood have a line between them. There is separation of temple and state. And the Hasmoneans did not respect that. And right there, 1 Maccabees chapter 14, also that the Jews and priests were well pleased that Simon should be their governor and high priest forever, until there should arise a faithful prophet. And we shouldn't be surprised that just as the Hasmoneans came to power against any kind of assimilation, that was the way that they ruled. So when they conquered a city, they would place their religiously observant communities into that city to make that city observant as well. And there were mass conversions of their conquered populations. So they really, ISIS is not an unfair comparison for the Hasmoneans. The difference is 2,100 years, right? So if we can have any, because while I said Alexander the Great was good to the Jews, there were a lot of people he wasn't so good to, right? This was the way of the world at the time. I'm not apologizing for it, but we can read it in that. We should see this as ISIS, but we should also see it in a slightly different historical context. All right. So, the book of Maccabees is not in our Hebrew Bible, which means that when you read the Torah, when you read the Hebrew scripture, you see nothing of Chanukah. So now we are Mishnah, Gemara, the rabbinic literature, which is that next generation of telling what Jews do. And we are in the section of Talmud which talks about Shabbat. And the Talmud is rabbinic teaching and debate, and the rabbis are discussing which wicks and oils are allowed for a Shabbat meal. Do you guys need a break? If I give you a 5-minute break so I can go run and get something from my office and we can get more donuts and coffee?
I have a question.
Yes, question.
I'm trying to imagine these Judaism. I don't know why. Were they more of like a Baptist, or were they like?
I think there were sporting events that took place there. There were races. There were
weightlifting.
No, it was a social gathering place.
Oh, so they just gave it the name Judaism.
Yeah. And that's where gymnasium comes from. They were a place of sport. But sport 2,100 years ago.
But more like a bath.
Yeah. And everyone was neat. Everyone was neat.
So where did they put those weights?
They were done by that. Yeah, they had already done it. Yeah. That they would do at home.
Okay. Stuck in.
Alright, it is 7:43. We'll gather again at 7:50. Okay.
So, as much as we know, I mean, we actually,
Right.
does he stick my hand in the t-shirt? Yes.
Any other, I know that was a lot. And we're going to give ourselves probably about 20 minutes at the end to talk about what we do with this. So we're not going to go there yet. But are there any questions about the material? For those who came in late, we're going to recap. In our historical understanding of what happened, the best historical understanding we can have, that is not the packet. That's someone's homework. There should be more packets out on the table in the foyer, and if you want to bring in some. So here's your recap. The Maccabees, or Asmoneans, were religious zealots. And at a time where Jews were becoming more and more accepting of Greek culture and would have been the closest. I think it is okay to compare them to Reform Jews today. We don't know how they were or were not performing the mitzvot, but they were very much living in between their Jewish lives and their modern lives living in a Greek society. That the Maccabees were the ultra-Orthodox who not only were fighting against that modernizing society, but were also fighting against the Jews who accepted it. And then there came a point where the Syrian Greek leader, Antiochus Epiphanes, Antiochus IV, said, not only do we want the Jews accepting Greek culture, but we want them to give up their Judaism. And anyone who is practicing Judaism will be killed. And there were, we can assume, a significant portion of the Jewish community who said, okay, not necessarily happily, but chose giving up their Judaism completely versus risking their life and moving into the wilderness with the Maccabees to join their army. And the Maccabees, in their pursuit of reclaiming the temple, would have killed a significant number of these Jews along the way. Is that an okay synopsis? So now, what does the Talmud say? We are in the middle of talking about Shabbat lamps and what wicks and oils were allowed for a Shabbat lamp. This is an ancient Israelite lamp. It might be a facsimile. I don't know. It was given to me. When you go to Israel today, you can buy a lot of things that are either real or fake. I don't know. I hope it's fake because I've lived it. So you put oil in the middle, and the wick goes in that bowl, and the wick burns until you're out of wood. Right? So that's where the 1 day of oil lasting for 8 days would come from. That it's like a candle. That when the wax is gone, the candle doesn't burn anymore. When the oil's gone, the wick doesn't burn anymore. And the menorah was a lamp stand on which 7 of these, probably much larger, would have sat. But these lamps people would have had in their homes. And the lamp that you would use to light your home would be the same lamp that you would use for Shabbat, or the same style of lights. So the way that we make the Shabbat light special is that it has to be a certain kind of oil, and it has to be a certain kind of wick. Now, if you've ever studied with me, and you've heard me talk about Talmud, you know one of my favorite things about Talmud is that the rabbis take tangents in the same way I do. This one was actually a pretty clear one. They say, speaking of wicks and oils, what kind of wicks and oils are allowed in a Hanukkah lamp? The only thing is, we've never heard of Hanukkah before. Now, we can assume that people were celebrating Hanukkah if the rabbis were talking about it, but it was a very minor festival, and it wasn't mentioned anywhere in the literature until now. So it would have been purely an oral tradition. So I did not give you all of the Talmudic text of which wicks and oils are allowed, but it picks up with the laws of Hanukkah. So what is the precept, the law of Hanukkah? Hanukkah demands 1 light for a man in his household. So according to the Talmud, all you have to do is light a lamp every night of Hanukkah using the wick and oil that they just told you was okay. That's it. 8 days, 8 times lighting 1 lamp. But the zealous would light a light for each member of the household. So there are 4 people in my family. We have 4 lights, and we light them each night. And that's it. But the extremely zealous, now there's an argument. Shammai and Hillel have some 300 arguments throughout the Talmud. Shammai says, on the first day 8 lights are lit, and thereafter they're gradually reduced. But Hillel said, on the first day 1 is lit, and they're progressively increased. And there's an argument for why, but the reason of Beit Shammai is that it should correspond to the days still to come, and Beit Hillel is that it should correspond to the days that are gone, but the other says no. Shammai says that it's the bullocks of the festival, it's how many sacrifices were offered each day, and Hillel says that we increase in matters of sanctity, we don't decrease. Right? Why would we go from 8 to 1? We go holier and holier. We strive to be holier and holier. So we start with 1 and go to 8. You with me so far? So you guys didn't know, in the spirit of the Hasmoneans, you all are the most zealous of the zealots. Right? Because we start with 1 and go to 8. Continues, our rabbis taught, it is incumbent to place the Chanukah lamp by the door of one's house on the outside. If one dwells in an upper chamber, he places it at the window nearest the street. So where do we put our Chanukah lamp? Where everyone can see it.
Yeah.
Right? Chanukah is a time where we wear our Judaism on our sleeve, and we put this light where everyone can see it. But the rabbis tell us, in times of danger, it's sufficient to place it on the table. Right? And that's the reality of 2,000 years ago is the reality of today. That if you don't feel safe having your Judaism in your window, the rabbis say you can put it inside. There's a great story, I wish I forgot about it. And I don't know what year it was from, so I don't know where it was, someone might know. But there was a neighborhood where a Jewish home was vandalized during Hanukkah. And the following night, everyone in that neighborhood had a menorah in there with it. So this has been, it was like, was it Skokie?
Yes.
Okay.
An old British Digest has that story. I think December.
All right, so that's why we put our menorah in the window. Now the shamas, I'm going to break another Hanukkah myth. Why do you have the shamas? To light all the other candles. Kinda, but not really. Rabbah said, another lamp is required for its light to be used. Yet if there is a blazing fire, it's unnecessary. But in the case of an important person, even if there is a blazing fire, another lamp is required. The Hanukkah light, according to the rabbis, is supposed to have no purpose other than being a Hanukkah light. So this can't be the only light lit in my house. So there's this kind of legal fiction that if we have 2 lamps, there are 2 fires burning, that we're using one and not the other. So that's why the shamash traditionally should be higher than the other candles, because we're using its light and not the others. So then the rabbis say, if you've got a fire burning in the fireplace, you don't need a shamash, because you're using the light from the fire. But if you're wealthy and you can afford an extra lamp, then you should have it in. Right? So using the shamas to light the other candles, if you had a lighter or a match, you can use that to light all the candles. You cannot use one Hanukkah candle to light another, because that would be making use of its light. So there's no reason not to have a shamas, like it says. If you can afford the extra 8 candles, then you should do it. But sorry. Now, After all of this, the rabbis say, my Chanukah. What is this Hanukkah that we're talking about? For our rabbis taught on the 25th of Kislev begin the days of Hanukkah, which are 8, on which a lamentation for the dead and fasting are forbidden. We don't mourn traditionally on Hanukkah. For when the Greeks entered the temple, they defiled all the oils therein, and when the Hasmonean dynasty, the Maccabees, prevailed against and defeated them, they made search and found only one cruse of oil, which lay with the seal of the high priest, but which contained sufficient for one day's light oil, not only. Yet a miracle was wrought therein, and they lit the lamp therewith for 8 days. The following year, these days were appointed in festival by saying Hallel and Thanksgiving. So, did the rabbis make the story up? Maybe. Or, by that point, that was the story that was being told. Now, again, the rabbis, we understand why they would not have wanted to broadcast the whole story. Right? The Maccabees were a problem for a lot of reasons. Why they couldn't have said they missed Sukkot while they were fighting, and then we celebrated Sukkot, they could have. They could have talked about the miracle of the military victory. They could have talked about religious freedom. There were a lot of things they could have talked about. But there was this miracle that was the story. The parallel that I use when I'm teaching this is George Washington and the cherry tree, which is a story that we all learn as children about George Washington. And we had a teacher here teaching, I think 10 years ago, from USF, who taught how we know that the story of the cherry tree never happened. Sorry, we didn't. So if we know that the story of the cherry tree never happened, does that mean that we shouldn't teach the story to children? I don't think so. Because that story takes the idea of honesty, of integrity, and makes it understandable to children. But if you're 50 years old and all you know of George Washington is that he couldn't tell a lie when he cut down the cherry tree, you're missing something. So as we're thinking about what Hanukkah means to us today, is it bad to teach the story of the oil? And, I can see, we can come from this and say we shouldn't be celebrating Hanukkah at all. We should get rid of the holiday. I'm not going to do it. I actually think that this has the potential to make Hanukkah exponentially more meaningful for us as Reform Jews today. And I have no problem teaching the story of the oil to our kids and telling the story in services. But this will also not be the last time I teach this class. And I do teach this to my confirmation, to my 9th grade class. Because they should know it, right? And the goal of my confirmation class is creating Jewish adults. And I think there are a lot of people who think Judaism is silly because we have this holiday of 1 day of oil that lasts for 8 days. But I don't have a problem telling the story. So the rabbis added this, or somehow this miracle of the oil was added, whether it was because they were uncomfortable with the military victory or all of those things we talked about. They shift the focus to the oil and away from the Maccabees. We're going to come back, but I want to ruin one more thing for you. The dreidel. The dreidel was a German top game. And where we have Nun Gimel Hashin, Nesta Gol Hayasham, a great miracle happened there. So the Nun is, what happens with the Nun? Nothing. Nothing. Nish. Nothing. What happens with the gimel? You take it all. Guns. Hey, you get half, halb, and shin, Stelline, put one in. So it was a German game that we adopted and added to our Hanukkah celebration. Latkes also were a German, Eastern European food, but there was another name for it. Sorry. So, now that I've ruined it, what do we do with it? Right? We would have all, if this were 2,100 years ago, and we at Congregation Shaarei Tzedek were living in this kind of a world, we would have either been murdered, we would have had to give up our Judaism completely, or we would have had to join forces with the Zealots. Right? The Maccabees, if the Maccabees existed today, they would despise us. Right? If the Maccabees existed today and saw what Chanukah was in this country, yeah. Right? Because Hanukkah is now the most assimilated of our holidays. We started with Hanukkah Harry on Saturday Night Live and Rugrats Hanukkah, and how we now have the Hanukkah menorah next to the Christmas tree in every holiday display. And
Mensch on a bench.
Mensch on a bench, and the Shark Tank with the Jewish star on top of the Christmas tree. And we can all debate whether or not these things are good, and if there's a limit, and what that limit is. But not what the Maccabees had in mind. I think we can all agree. So when I think about this and what we can make of it, I look at a few things. First is, no, the Maccabees would not have been the biggest fans of ours, and we would not have been the biggest fans of the Maccabees. But when an ultra-Orthodox Jew or an Orthodox Jew is attacked today for looking Jewish, it doesn't matter if they think that I am the worst sinner in the world because I'm preaching Reform Judaism to you. I don't care what they think of me. It's not okay. They are being attacked for looking Jewish. We're being attacked. And the Hellenized Jews who saw what was happening, I don't care which side they went to, no one was happy. Right? I can't imagine the pain of someone who gave up their Judaism and was fighting against the Maccabees. They weren't happy to be doing so. So, to celebrate our freedom, no matter what the world is, we are free to practice our Judaism however we want to practice our Judaism. And we may not agree with everyone's way of practicing Judaism, but I thank God that they can do it. So, for us to embrace Hanukkah as a celebration of our freedom to be Jews in the way that we're Jews is fully valid and makes the holiday work. And in that same vein, the idea of putting our menorah in the window, we're going to be celebrating Hanukkah at Armature Works on Sunday night. And to say that we, not just are we free to practice Judaism in the way that we want to, but we can do it at the most popular public spot in Tampa. I have no problem putting my menorah in the window on Hanukkah and saying that this is a time, something I'm not afraid to do anytime. But there are people who don't talk about their Judaism for 357 days a year and are wearing Chanukah sweaters during Hanukkah, right? Do I wish that they were more connected to their Judaism? Of course I do. Do I love that Hanukkah is a time where people are proud to be Jewish? I do. And I don't think that was the case when I was a child. I think we have seen that happen over the last 35 years. And I think that's wonderful. I really do. And the adopting of the dreidel, right? Well, gifts. There's no reason to give gifts on Hanukkah. The money we talked about, that there was a tradition of giving money because of those coins, the Hasmonean coins, and also the shamas, right? One of the things that you're not allowed to do by the Hanukkah light is count money. That's a use of light. And that's one of the examples given. So the giving of coins is a way of reminding that we're not using the Hanukkah light, we're using the shamas. Otherwise, there's no reason to give gifts. Why do we give gifts? Because we've adopted the practice of our neighbors. And Jews have always adopted the practice of our neighbors. Are there limits? I think so. There are limits for my family, but I'm not going to judge what other families do. And there's a question. How much should we decorate for Hanukkah? How much should we, look, I don't think, for me, that Hanukkah should try to compete with Christmas. I feel worse for Christianity and what Christmas has become than I do for Judaism and what Hanukkah has become. I would be very sad if Yom Kippur became like this big, I don't even know, right? So that this is such a holy day for Christianity, and then people will say, well, it's not a religious holiday, it's an American holiday. That's not my area of expertise, but it's not, I don't get into the Hanukkah Christmas debate, and I don't tell families what's right to do in their home. And I think that you see in this lesson why we can say Hanukkah is davka. Davka is a great word that you can't really translate exactly, right? Hanukkah is davka, why we should separate between Hanukkah and Christmas and make sure that there is a very fair line and not do any of these things that we're talking about. And if someone says that we shouldn't have menorahs in the shopping malls and we should do all of those things, I understand that perspective. And there's perfect reason for saying we should decorate our home and we should make it everything we want it to be, and we should make it a big deal because we're adopting other practices, and we're doing what Jews have always done. We're doing what was done with dreidels and latkes, we're just doing it with gifts and lights. Where was I headed? That's not the answer. Questions, thoughts, how about that? Oh, so presents. Right? Another thing that it does, that presents do, and the joke of Hanukkah Harry, right, where the little girl at the end says, oh, now I get it. I was always jealous of my Jewish friends because they got 8 days of gifts, but now I know that they're getting socks and slacks, and I don't have to be upset. Right? That we don't want our kids to resent Hanukkah. And I think there is a way to prevent resentment without trying to compete. So personally, that's what we try to do. So I would never say we're not going to give our kids gifts. We're not just giving socks. Although my daughter asked for clothes, which I can't believe. And I think it's mistake, but that's okay. Thoughts, questions? Did I bring Chanukah back a little bit?
Yeah.
So where did I leave it? That celebrating our freedom. And no matter what the Maccabees would have thought of us, no matter what other Jews in today's world might think of us, that we celebrate that we can practice Judaism in our way freely. And even in a changing world, we're doing okay. And I'm not going to let a few people who have decided that we are the target ruin life for us. And unfortunately, we're living in a time where one person can do a lot of damage. But that one person is not representative. I still believe that. So I do believe that we are free and we can put our menorah out on the road. If one person is going to do something, I think we have an entire community who put menorahs in their windows if something happens. I know that. And so freedom, showing our Judaism, being proud of who we are, and in some ways, I could say a little middle finger to the Maccabees, right? We are grateful, if they saved Judaism, so we can be grateful to them for that. And they also would have liked us very much. So for them to see what we're doing with Chanukah, I'd be okay with it. Bring them on. All right, I'll end with that. But other thoughts or questions before? Yes?
If you accept the proposition that a tree is a pagan symbol, then what is wrong with having a tree?
Yeah. And that's partially where I didn't want to go. For me, the tree is different, right? Because it is so symbolic of what Christmas is. Wherever it came from, whatever it is, Santa Claus is the same thing, right? And I understand a Jewish family that will tell their kids that Santa brings them a gift because it's easier than trying to explain why Santa does it. And an interfaith family is a different story too. And so I do not judge, okay? And my dad was fired from teaching second grade Sunday school 40 years ago because he yelled at a family for having a Christmas tree. And he's changed a lot since then. And it really was. I think there are those for whom it is the worst of the worst, and that's not me. But for me, we can accept other customs and make Hanukkah something special, but to me, that's a lie. Right? And my daughter loves Christmas, and she loves Santa Claus, because why wouldn't you in today's world? And we don't, what we say is we're very, very lucky that we have friends and family who give gifts to one another and who love one another, and we're happy for our friends who Santa visits. It's working for now. We go to friends, we talk about how we celebrate Christmas with our friends who celebrate Christmas, just like we have friends who celebrate Passover with us. Something I learned from Rabbi Bernholtz is talking about how we celebrate other people's birthday, even though it's not our birthday, but we also don't, pretend like it's our birthday. And my daughter says, "So, Daddy, if we celebrate Christmas with Aunt Jamie and Uncle Chris, it's kind of like we're celebrating Christmas, right?" Which is fine. So, and really, and we don't have a backyard right now, build a sukkah in your backyard. And make the biggest deal you can out of the sukkah in your backyard, and put up lights and decorations, and make Sukkot the biggest deal that you can make Sukkot, because what an awesome holiday that we don't do enough with. That could be so much fun. Give a gift on every night of Sukkot. I don't care. Let's reclaim. Let's really, in the spirit of Hanukkah, let's reclaim Sukkot. And also focusing on the positive. That it's not about what we don't do. Now, full disclosure, my parents told me there was no Santa Claus. And I still slept by the fireplace every Christmas Eve just in case they were lying and Santa made a mistake on me. So, and I turned out okay. I turned out all right. It's hard. It's hard. But I think that's maybe another lesson from it. That being Jewish isn't always easy. And there are things that we don't do. And when I hear the story, and I compare it to Reform Jews, and there are a lot of things that we do to blend in, but we also don't uncircumcise ourselves. Like that it's not us. There are lines. There are things where we say we are different because we're Jewish, and that's okay. And there are things that people who aren't Jewish do, and that's great. And that's up to each family to decide. That conversation is very much in the spirit of Hanukkah. And something that each, I don't think I won't talk about uncircumcising anymore. All right, so hopefully no one laughed during the break. And do we all feel okay about celebrating Hanukkah next week? Good. Good. And you can still tell a little story. And it's complex. And it should be. And how beautiful that it's complex. Like, what a great thing to wrestle with.
Was the war for Hanukkah war, Maccabees, was that the first religious war? I read that somewhere.
Question is, was this the first religious war? I don't know. Where'd you read it?
I can't remember. That would help if I could remember. I can't remember. I don't remember.
I mean, no. Well, the Torah is full of war.
Yeah. Right.
Right? It wasn't. They were more national wars than religious. And I think that this might be the first time where it wasn't about nationality, it really was about religious practice.
I think that's the way I think it was.
Could it be compared to the Holocaust? No. I mean, in the fact that they were trying.
Oh yeah.
Eliminate.
No, and I think I made some of those comparisons. But it wasn't, and the way I think Hitler learned from Antiochus. But it was about practice, it wasn't about blood. So happy Hanukkah. For those who have been in the introduction class, I really, really wanted to open tonight up, so thank you for welcoming others in, but I want to tell you how wonderful the last few months have been.